The lesser-known candidate is presented by the law firm of SSA Lawyers PA, a law firm representing the disabled in Social Security and VA compensation claims. If you need an attorney to assist you with a Social Security or VA compensation claim, call the law firm of SSA Lawyers PA at 1-800-875-8064 or send an email to info@ssalawyers.com. And now, back to the lesser-known candidate. The next matter on the docket is the case of Ricardo Della Grande, announced the clerk of the Freehold, New Jersey Tree Board. Ricardo Della Grande, a slightly overweight, light-skinned Hispanic man in his early 60s, approached the podium. He was dressed in a dark blue suit, white shirt, and red tie. Around his wrist was a shining Rolex watch. His thick black and gray hair was combed back perfectly in place. Not a person in the audience, on the board, or for that matter in the borough did not know Mr. Della Grande, the owner of Della Grande Auto Group, due to his outrageous and obnoxious TV commercials where he would yell and scream that he would not be undersold under any circumstances. "My prices are so crazy low they threatened to Baker Act me," he once said. Della Grande Auto Group was currently running commercials featuring Adam George, a professional baseball player for the New York Yankees and a shoo-in to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. As a result, local Yankee fans who typically would not pay attention to car commercials would watch the ad just to see their favorite baseball player. Adam George was a 24-year-old, 6'8", 260-pound slugger from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He primarily was a first baseman, but occasionally was assigned to play right field. He was a four-sport athlete in high school, where he excelled in football, basketball, baseball, and track. Besides being good at athletics, Adam was also a bright student. Even though he was offered athletic scholarships at a number of colleges, he elected to attend and play baseball at the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League school that did not offer athletic scholarships. Rocky's son Miguel played college baseball with Adam George and was his roommate before Adam was drafted by the Yankees. Because of his close friendship with Miguel, Adam had agreed to be the official spokesperson for the Della Grande Auto Group and participate in their commercials. On this day, Rocky, Ricardo's nickname, was very serious. Several years earlier, Rocky had entered into an agreement with an elderly couple who owned a house adjacent to his dealership to purchase their property upon their death. He wanted to buy their property to expand the dealership. A year later, the husband died, and then 6 months after that, the wife passed away. The estate was probated, and Mr. Della Grande closed on the sale. In the middle of the property stood a grand oak tree, a tree that was protected by a city ordinance from being cut down without the permission of the local tree board. Rocky Della Grande had requested that the tree board grant him a variance and permit him to remove the tree. He offered to plant 10 oak trees around the perimeter of the property to replace the oak tree he would be removing. He explained that the expansion of the dealership would result in the creation of jobs in the community. Furthermore, the additional trees to be planted would have a positive impact on reducing carbon emissions. After listening to Rocky's argument, the tree board took a vote. The results were 5-0 to deny the variance. The chairman of the tree board admonished Rocky that he knew that the tree was on the property when he bought it, and if they changed the rules for him, they would have to change them for everyone, and that would defeat the intent of the ordinance, which was to preserve the beautification, air cooling, property value enhancement, and other attributes of trees within a city. Rocky was furious, but outwardly suppressed his emotions. He calmly exited the hearing room and returned to the dealership. He then called an arborist and requested that they remove the tree. He understood there would be repercussions, but he needed to clear the property to expand his business. Several days later, a member of the tree board had driven past the dealership and noticed that the old oak tree had been removed, in defiance to their ruling. Rocky was sent a citation to appear before the tree board to show cause as to why he should not be fined and prosecuted. Rocky did not respond to the citation. At the hearing, in Rocky's absence, the tree board voted to impose a fine of $10,000 and request that the district attorney file misdemeanor charges against Mr. Della Grande. The county district attorney filed charges against Rocky for violation of the county tree ordinance. Rocky hired an attorney to defend the charges. The county judge found Rocky guilty and ordered him to perform 90 hours of community service and pay the fine imposed by the tree board. Upon being fined by the court and given 90 hours of community service, Rocky Della Grande was determined to appeal the decision. It wasn't that he could not afford to pay the fine, and he had no problem doing community service. After all, he had done more community service than 90 hours every year on a voluntary basis. It was the principle of the thing. The government should not be allowed to take away his property rights without compensating him. Although Rocky had a law degree and was admitted to the New Jersey bar, he had never practiced law. At first, he tried to hire a lawyer in Freehold to appeal the decision. After speaking to a number of land use attorneys, none of them wanted to handle the appeal for less than $25,000. They told him that their charges for handling the appeal would exceed any benefit he would attain if he won. Rocky contemplated handling the appeal himself, however he knew he was not competent in handling appeals. He decided to do a Google search to see if there were any cases similar to his, which had been decided on appeal. He typed in the Google search engine Tree Board Decisions Appeal. On page 2 of the search results, he found a case out of Tampa, Florida. In that case, a strip club owner bought a vacant lot next to his business, intending to add additional parking. Several large oak trees were situated on the land. He wanted to remove them to make way for a new parking lot. The strip club owner applied for a permit with the city. The city rejected the permit. He appealed to the tree board, and the tree board upheld the decision and denied him the permit. Similar to what Rocky did, the club owner hired workers to cut the trees down. The county then fined the club owner $75,000, $25,000 for each tree, and the strip club owner appealed. Rocky did some research on the attorney who handled the case. According to an article in the St. Petersburg Times, the attorney for the owner of this club was David Bernstein. David Bernstein was a local disability attorney and past chair of the Hillsborough County Democratic Executive Committee. He became friends with the owner of the strip club when one of his clients, who was nearly blind, complained about a local city ordinance that prohibited nude dancers from coming within 6 feet of their customers. The client said he was unable to see that far and said that the ordinance violated his rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. David, who was also an amateur stand-up comedian, thought the whole scenario was very funny, so he agreed to handle the case pro bono. After the city was served with the complaint, the city council, which was currently very progressive and liberal, voted to repeal the antiquated 6-foot rule, rendering the lawsuit moot. Nonetheless, to the public, it appeared that David Bernstein scored a victory and forced the city to back down. David Bernstein's appeal of the tree board decision was twofold. First, he argued that the ordinance did not provide for compensation to the property owner, who was refused a permit to cut down trees on his property, violating his Fifth Amendment rights. Secondly, there were a number of business property owners on the same highway who were permitted to cut down trees on their property, and the strip club owner was denied equal protection under the Fifth and 14th Amendment to the Constitution. The circuit court held that the county ordinance did not violate the taking clause under the Fifth Amendment, but that the club owner established that the city denied the club owner a permit not because of environmental concerns or protection of heritage or endangered tree species, but because they objected to the increase in business to the strip club by adding more parking spaces. The court held that the club owner was treated differently than others similarly situated, and that the city was motivated by animosity or ill will toward the type of business owned by the appellant. After reading the decision and the news reports about the guy with low vision who sued the city under the Americans with Disabilities Act so he could get close enough to see the nude dancers, Rocky called David Bernstein to have a chat. David recognized that Rocky's case was very similar to the tree board case he recently handled, except that he did not believe the equal protection argument was applicable. He told Rocky that even though he won the appeal, he lost the argument that the ordinance violated the taking clause under the Fifth Amendment. He explained that since he was not admitted to practice in New Jersey, not only could he not handle the case, but could not even give him advice. However, he could send him a copy of his memorandum of law if Rocky decided to handle the appeal himself. After discussing the tree board situation, Rocky and David talked a little about their personal lives and background. It turned out David's father was born in Freehold, New Jersey, and came to Tampa to play professional baseball. Rocky asked David if he knew that Bruce Springsteen was from Freehold, which David confirmed. David also informed Rocky that his cousin was actually a classmate of Bruce Springsteen. David and Rocky also discussed their mutual interest in politics. David divulged that he taught a class to adults on the presidential election and primary system. After the conversation, Rocky decided not to appeal the decision. Instead, he was determined to lobby the state legislature of New Jersey to adopt a statute similar to a statute enacted recently by the state of Florida. The Florida statute provided that if a municipality denied a landowner a permit to remove a tree on his property, the city must compensate the owner the loss of potential value to the property had the tree been permitted to be removed. Rocky knew that to get the New Jersey legislature to act, he would need to get the backing of political organizations, financial backers who would contribute to the campaigns of the politicians, or both. He started with the local Democratic organization. Rocky tried to frame the issue as a privacy rights issue. People should be able to do whatever they want to their own property without the interference from government. Unfortunately for Rocky, neither the Monmouth County Democratic Committee nor the State Democratic Party was interested in taking up the issue. Rocky was not at all happy with the response from the Democratic organizations. After all, he had annually contributed $10,000 to be a platinum sponsor of their Kennedy King Gala, an event which was for the purpose of raising money for Democratic candidates. Rocky approached other political organizations such as the New Jersey Automobile Dealers Association, New Jersey Farm Bureau, and Chamber of Commerce to no avail. Although Rocky was registered as a Democrat, primarily because the majority of members of the New Jersey legislature were Democrats, and he wanted to ensure he was in their good graces, personally he liked the philosophy of Ronald Reagan that the problem with the government was the government. Rocky was trying to figure a way to get the attention of the state legislature and come up with a unique idea. He was going to run for public office. This would give him a platform to talk about his issue, but he didn't want to upset incumbent lawmakers by running against them. He could run against Republican lawmakers, but he would need their help too in matters pertaining to his car dealership. A lot of the lobbying he did was nonpartisan, but to benefit the automobile dealers and farming industry, he needed the support of both Republicans and Democrats. Rocky then thought to himself, what if I run for an office I couldn't possibly win? That would give me a lot of publicity and would help bring more name recognition to the dealership while at the same time bringing attention to the tree board issue. He looked at the governor's race, but that was 4 years off. The Senate race was out of the question. I've got it, Rocky decided. I'll run for president of the United States. I'll spend about $100,000 and get on the primary ballot in every state. I'll frame this as me being a hero for small businesses and defender of property rights. If things fall into place, it will be cheaper advertising for my dealerships than actually putting on TV commercials, and I'll be able to bring attention to my issue with the damn tree board. Rocky knew that running a campaign required that he hire a consultant. He contacted some of the political consultants who had called him for political contributions for their candidates. He was rebuffed by all of them, even when Rocky offered them a significantly higher salary than the fee they usually received. The typical response was that if they took the position, they would be blackballed from working on other campaigns in the future. Rocky then remembered his conversation with David Bernstein. He wasn't a professional consultant, but he knew a lot about presidential elections and was the past chairman of the Hillsborough County Democratic Party. Rocky called David Bernstein's office to speak with David. He was advised that David was in a hearing and the next available appointment was 2 weeks away. Rocky told the receptionist that he didn't want to wait 2 weeks. He insisted that David call him as soon as he got back from his hearing. The receptionist told Rocky that she would give him the message but could not guarantee he would call. She suggested that perhaps he could leave his telephone number and David might be able to call him in the evening after his appointments. Rocky reluctantly agreed. That evening, David returned Rocky's call. When Rocky explained what he wanted to do, David was entertained but not sure why he called. Rocky then told David he wanted to hire him as his political consultant. David said he was flattered, but he had a busy practice and did not have the time, and besides, he was not a professional consultant. Rocky implored David to reconsider. He offered him a salary of $20,000 per month and told him he could work mostly remotely. David said he would give it some thought. After he hung up the phone, David talked it over with his wife at dinner. This offer was intriguing to David. His wife recommended that David check out Rocky's background, to see if he even had the money to pay him or if he was just some crackpot. David went on the internet. He found a story about how Rocky's father started with a small car lot and built the largest network of car dealerships in all of New Jersey. The article was very interesting, detailed, and included interviews with members of the Della Grande family. Miguel Della Grande, the patriarch of the family, came to the United States of America from Spain with his 7 brothers and 5 sisters in the 1890s and settled in New York. He moved to Freehold, New Jersey in 1920 and bought a small potato farm. The potato farm was very successful, and Miguel used his profits to purchase additional farmland. He married Maria Fuentes in 1928, and they had 4 children, Ricardo, Francisco, Sarita, and Miguel Jr., whom they called Miguelito. Ricardo was born in 1930. He attended Freehold High School and went on to obtain a bachelor's degree in business from Rutgers University. After graduation, he worked with his father at the potato farm. The Della Grande farm consisted of 500 acres and was one of the largest farms in Monmouth County. Miguel Della Grande not only owned a successful farm, but also a profitable distillery business not far from his farm. Ricardo's main job for the family farm was to be active in the Atlantic Grange organization and the New Jersey Farm Bureau. The Grange was mainly a social organization, but also a lobby for farmers. Ricardo's pet project was to push for enactment of the New Jersey Farmland Assessment Act, which finally passed in 1964. The act allowed farmland to be taxed at its productivity value and not at its landmass value. Although of age to be drafted into the Army for the Korean War, in 1951, Ricardo applied for and was granted a college deferment based on aptitude scores and class standing among male members of his college class. After World War II, returning veterans wanted to buy homes. There was massive public investment in highways, sewers, and schools, resulting in alternative use of farmland as the foregoing was more profitable. For agriculture to survive, farmers had to make money. The cost of running a farm was rising, including the price increase in labor, utilities, raw materials, and most importantly, escalating land values resulting in higher taxes. In 1955, Ricardo married Sharon Gross, a Jewish girl he met when he attended Freehold High School. As a practicing Catholic, Miguel was not thrilled about Ricardo marrying out of the faith, but reluctantly accepted the decision of his son. On the other hand, Sharon's family was inconsolable and disowned her. Her parents and siblings refused to attend the wedding and did not speak to her until years later. By 1956, Ricardo saw that the future of the potato farm business was tenuous. He anticipated that one day the farm would be sold to real estate developers. It was at that point he decided to go into business. He saw that America was in love with cars, so he became determined to open an automobile dealership. Ricardo borrowed money from his dad and purchased some land on South Main Street in Toms River, New Jersey. When Ricardo Jr. was born in 1956, his father, Ricardo Sr., was the owner of one small automobile dealership. His grandfather, Miguel, died in 1960, leaving the potato farm to his 4 children. The potato farm was sold to developers, and the proceeds were divided amongst his 4 children, who inherited about $50 million each. Ricardo Sr.'s net worth, including the car dealership, was about $75 million. Ricardo Sr. and his wife Frances had 2 children, Ricardo Jr., whom they called Rocky, and Anthony, Rocky's younger brother. In 1996, at the age of 66 years old, Ricardo Sr. died. In 2000, Rocky's mother Frances died, at which time Rocky and Anthony inherited the dealerships, which by that time consisted of 5 franchises, including Subaru, Hyundai, Toyota, Honda, and Mazda. The value of the dealerships by the year 2000 were approximately $120 million, including stocks and bank account. The remaining value of the estate was around $25 million. Each brother received about $12 million and 50% interest in the dealership. They decided to continue to work as partners in the dealership, with Anthony being in charge of service and repairs, and Rocky heading up sales and the business end of the dealerships. David and his wife Mara agreed that David should accept the offer from Rocky. Mara cautioned him that people like Rocky were going to be very demanding and are used to people taking orders. She advised him to tell Rocky that the law practice came first and that he could not expect David to neglect his other clients. David Bernstein had been an attorney for over 40 years, primarily in the areas of Social Security and veterans disability law. Over the years, David observed that the claims and appeals process with both federal programs were slow, complicated, and had rules and regulations which made little sense. Currently, a person who made a claim for Social Security disability benefits had to wait up to a year for the State Disability Determination Service to make a decision. When a claimant filed a claim, a local office of the Social Security Administration would take the application and then forward the application to the State Disability Determination Agency to make a decision as to whether the claimant was disabled. The state agency would first assign the case to the developmental unit. At this stage, forms and questionnaires would be sent to the claimant to complete, and medical records would be requested. The problem that attorneys and claimants had at this stage was that there was nobody with the state agency with whom they could contact to discuss the claim. The case would not be assigned to a claims adjudicator for months. Therefore, even if a claimant had an obvious disability or was in dire need, they would have to wait an inordinate length of time to get a decision. David had tried to discuss this problem with his congressperson, but was unable to get just a few minutes of her time. David was disappointed that even Democratic congresspersons did not seem to care about these individuals who were too disabled to work, had no income, and many who could not afford health insurance. David remembered his disgust during the presidential primary debates in 2020 when the candidates said things such as, "The measure of a society is how it treats its elderly, children, and disabled." They talk the talk, but then things only get worse, regardless of whether Republicans or Democrats get elected, David thought. Although David did not support Bernie Sanders in the previous elections, he thought that Bernie was right about one thing, and that is that money has corrupted our political process. If someone wanted to talk to a congressperson, they had to donate money to him or her. If they want a bill introduced, they had to be a part of a group that donated a lot of money. The Veterans Disability Program had similar problems. If a veteran applied for benefits and received a decision which was unfavorable or less favorable than the veteran requested, and the veteran appealed the decision and asked for a hearing before a veteran's disability judge, it was taking over 4 years to get a decision from the Board of Veterans' Appeals. A saying had become popular amongst veterans who were awaiting a decision on their disability claims: delay, deny, wait till we die. David and other attorneys had attempted to force the Veterans Benefits Administration to make prompter decisions by filing an action called a Petition for Writ of Mandamus with the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Unfortunately, most of those petitions were denied. The court held that it did not have the authority to set deadlines on administrative agencies to make decisions, and that if Congress wanted time parameters imposed, it would have included them in the Veterans Benefits Act. David Bernstein hoped that he could get Rocky on board with supporting legislation to improve the administration of these federal agencies and include that in his platform. The next day, David called Rocky and agreed to take the position. Rocky then told David he wanted him to fly into Trenton, New Jersey, Saturday morning. He would arrange a limo to pick him up at the airport. David said, "I did not know they even had an airport in Trenton." Rocky confirmed that they did. He said Frontier Airlines has direct flights from Tampa to Trenton, and he told David he would leave at 1:35 p.m. and get into Trenton at 4:15 p.m. He advised David that he could fly back from Newark the next day at 8 a.m. and get into Tampa about 11 a.m. David wasn't thrilled about flying Frontier. The seats were not particularly comfortable. "Okay," he said, "but on the return flight, I want to fly first class." Rocky agreed. After he hung up, David realized what he had agreed to. The flight from Tampa to New Jersey would be 2.5 hours. He would be meeting with Rocky, going to sleep late, and waking up early the next day to catch the flight back to Tampa. According to MapQuest, it is a 45-minute drive from Freehold to Newark International Airport. He would have to get to the airport at least 2 hours early, which meant leaving Freehold no later than 5 a.m. He would have to get up at 4 a.m. to make it to the airport on time. He checked the United Airlines website and saw that there was a later flight at 9:40 a.m. for the same price, and one at 1:20, but about $400 more expensive. He called Rocky back and they agreed to have him fly Economy Plus at 1:20 p.m., which is about the same price as first class at 8 a.m. The next evening, after work, David would begin working on an outline as to how to get Rocky on the Democratic primary ballot in all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and the 5 territories, including American Samoa, Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. In teaching about the presidential elections and presidential primary process, David was aware that getting on the ballot in many states was not easy, and because political parties were private organizations and not governmental entities, they could make up pretty much any rules they wanted with respect to how they chose their nominee for president. In the beginning of this country, the first president, George Washington, was not affiliated with a political party. He was the only president to never be affiliated with a political party. Then came the election of 1796. In 1796, the country was divided between the Federalist Party and the Democratic Republican Party. The Federalists were primarily in northern states, and the Democratic Republicans were mostly in southern states. The Constitution did not provide for the election of presidents by citizens. Article 2, Section 3, Clause 1 of the United States Constitution provided that electors for each state and the number of electors would be equal to the number of persons in Congress from that state, and would meet and vote for 2 persons of whom at least one was not an inhabitant of that state. Back then, before the 12th Amendment was enacted, whoever got the most votes became president, and whoever got the second most number of votes became vice president. So how are electors chosen? Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 says that each state shall appoint in such a manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives. What this means is that the state legislature would choose the way electors were selected. There didn't have to be an election. At first, there was no voting by the people. Initially, state legislators chose the electors in most of the states. Gradually, states changed to selection by popular vote, but this was their choice. If a state later wanted to, it could change back and have the legislature choose the electors. It would be political suicide, but in theory they could do it. The election of 1796 was particularly nasty and personal. John Adams was a Federalist and identified with the British, and Thomas Jefferson was a Francophile, sympathizing with the French Revolution. Adams supporters accused Jefferson of having an affair with one of his female slaves and running away from British troops during the Revolution. Jefferson's camp accused Adams of wanting to be a king and having his son succeed him. Meanwhile, there was intrigue and deception. Alexander Hamilton secretly conspired to have his friend Thomas Pinckney of South Carolina win the election. The plan was for the Southern Federalists to withhold their votes for Adams, while the Northern Federalists would vote for Adams and Pinckney, giving Pinckney the victory, with Adams in second place remaining vice president. However, Hamilton's plan backfired when it was discovered. The Northern Federalists withheld their vote for Pinckney. This resulted in Adams getting 71 votes, Jefferson 68, and Pinckney 59. Adams was elected president, and Jefferson became vice president. As vice president, Jefferson's role was very limited. He believed his role was constitutionally limited to legislative matters instead of acting as an advisor to the president or assisting the president. Besides, Jefferson doubted Adams would take his advice anyway, as they were associated with competing parties and interests. Getting back to political parties, selection of the party nominee was duplicative and deceptive. After losing in 1796, Jefferson ran again in 1800. His running mate was Aaron Burr. In the meantime, Adams was upset at Hamilton for planning to have Pinckney elected instead of him. Hamilton, who did not support Adams and did not like Aaron Burr, supported Jefferson. In 1800, supporters of Jefferson accused Adams of being a hermaphrodite, while Adams supporters said Jefferson would openly promote immoral sexual acts. When the dust cleared, Jefferson and Burr received an equal number of votes. Per the Constitution, the tie would be broken via vote in the House of Representatives. A candidate needed 9 of 16 states to win. 8 states were controlled by the Democratic Republicans, 6 by the Federalists, and 2 were evenly divided. While the Federalist candidate was soundly defeated, the Federalists held the key as to which Democratic-Republican candidate, Jefferson or Burr, would be elected. As almost everyone knows, Hamilton threw his support behind Jefferson, which really made Burr angry. For this reason, among others, a few years later, Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel and shot and killed him. Nonetheless, Burr became vice president. So in the beginning of the country, there were no presidential primary elections and no statewide party caucuses. There were just a few insiders horse trading and bargaining for political favors. By 1801, the Congress decided that they needed a constitutional amendment to avoid what happened in 1796 and 1800. The 12th Amendment was passed in 1804, which provided for separate votes for president and vice president. This meant that if someone voted for, let's say, Jefferson and someone like Burr was also running for president from the same party, the highest vote getter would be president and the second highest vote getter would not necessarily be vice president. Likewise, the highest vote getter for vice president would become vice president. Since political parties want their candidates to be from the same party, this resulted in presidential candidates and vice presidential candidates running as a team. Although the next presidential election was almost 2 years away, the Democratic National Committee was getting ready for its quadrennial meeting to vote on, among other things, the new presidential nominating calendar. Historically, Iowa was the first state to hold a primary, which was in the caucus format. Next came the small state of New Hampshire. Iowa had been in first position since 1972, but the Democratic Party leaders were concerned that the percentages of black and brown people in Iowa did not reflect the makeup of the country or the Democratic Party. Furthermore, the Iowa Democratic Party screwed up the 2020 caucus and was unable to report the results until several days after the caucus. Many state governments, as well as officials of their respective state Democratic Party, wanted to be the first in the nation to hold a primary, or at least be one of the first few states. Although only a few delegates are awarded in the Iowa and New Hampshire primaries, the results of these primaries appear to set the stage as to who will be eliminated and who has momentum. Candidates spend a lot of time campaigning in these states, going from city to city and going to both small gatherings as well as large venues. They spend millions of dollars in campaign advertising and hire locals to work. Their large staffs eat at local restaurants and stay at local hotels. The primary in those states is a boon to the state's economy. Furthermore, and maybe the most important, candidates try to persuade the voters in those states to vote for them by promising to support issues which would financially benefit them individually as well as benefit the state. As an example, in the past, candidates would feel pressure to support the biofuel industry because Iowa is a large producer of ethanol. Ethanol has detractors from both the petroleum industry and environmental groups, but has a lot of support from Iowans. Democratic candidates had to be familiar with the issues pertaining to ethanol and be able to answer questions at town hall meetings and TV and radio interviews to the satisfaction of Iowa voters. Candidates had to balance their need to make a strong showing in Iowa while still maintaining their environmental credentials for primaries down the road. After much debate, lobbying, and conniving, deal-making, and backstabbing, the Rules Committee adopted their rules for the following Democratic National Convention. The rules were very detailed and complex. There were formulas for awarding delegates, requirements of states to submit delegate selection and affirmative action plans, and requirements for the contents of these plans. Once the state plans were implemented, they could not be amended unless they were approved by the National, State, and Rules and Bylaws Committee at least 35 days prior to the time the amendment would be implemented and at least 30 days prior to applicable state election procedures. Although this paragraph of the plan has never been significant in the past, unbeknownst to the committee, it would be extremely important in the not-too-distant future. David was very familiar with the delegate selection plans because in 2004 he was elected as a delegate to the Democratic National Convention in Boston, Massachusetts. When he ran to become a delegate, Florida had about 125 pledged delegate positions elected by congressional district. Each congressional district had 5 or 6 delegate positions available with an alternate. The district had to have an equal number of men and women. The state party also had to make an effort to recruit African Americans, LGBTA persons, older and younger people to run for delegate positions in order to meet the affirmative action and diversity goals of the state party. To become a delegate, a candidate had to run as a delegate for a specific presidential candidate. Then, the candidate had to meet a certain percentage of votes in the presidential preference primary to qualify for delegates. If a presidential candidate received 50% of the vote, for example, that candidate would get half the delegates. David had signed up to run as a John Kerry delegate. So did most of the people who wanted to become delegates. After the presidential primary election, a date was set for the delegate election. Each congressional district had a designated location where the election would take place. David lived in Congressional District 9, which encompassed Northwest Hillsborough County, North Pinellas County, and Southwest Pasco County. The election was scheduled to take place in Trinity, Florida, at the Trinity Library. The polling location was 30 minutes from David's house. It would have been very difficult to get registered voters in Hillsborough County to vote for convention delegates in this special election, even if the election was in Hillsborough County, but to get them to drive to Trinity, Florida was next to impossible. However, David and another Tampa attorney, Bert Herkowitz, concocted a plan. They agreed with 2 women in Pinellas County and 2 people, a man and a woman in Pasco County, to form a slate. The agreement was that each would get 20 people to vote in the delegate election, and each of those people would agree to vote for the slate. Bert and David decided to rent a bus to take people in Hillsborough County to the voting site. To entice them to come, Bert and David offered to donate $1,000 to the Hillsborough County Democratic Executive Committee if 40 members got on the bus and voted in the delegate election. Bert and David made it clear that the donation and bus ride was not contingent on how they voted. On the bus ride, Bert handed the riders their slate card and offered coffee, orange juice, and donuts. When the bus arrived at the Trinity Library, the other delegate candidates, who were not on the slate, were visibly disappointed. Needless to say, the slate was easily elected, and David got to be a delegate to the convention. When the convention took place, the presidential and vice presidential candidates had already been determined. Nonetheless, the convention was very exciting. One of the highlights was the keynote speech of Senator Barack Obama. David had never heard of Barack Obama, but was impressed at how well he spoke. After hearing John Kerry and John Edwards speak, he was positive that they would win the general election. There was no way George W. Bush and Dick Cheney had any chance of beating them. As everyone knows, David could not have been more wrong. The lesser-known candidate is presented by the law firm of SSA Lawyers PA, a law firm representing the disabled in Social Security and VA compensation claims. If you need an attorney to assist you with a Social Security or VA compensation claim, call the law firm of SSA Lawyers PA at 1-800-875-8064 or send an email to info@ssalawyers.com. And now, back to the lesser-known candidate.